Welcome, everyone, to the HGC Post-Show number 3. This is for week 3 of the second quarter of HGC for every region except China, because China got started a little bit earlier, but they only play 4 games a week, so I think they're going to end at roughly the same time. Let's just start with China. So China, currently in the standings, challenge everything, doing exceptionally well. 4 wins, E-Star Gaming, 4 wins, Super Perfect Team, 4 wins. Those are the top 3 teams in China, and I don't like saying this, but X Team, Hots Lady RPG, SOA, and KIS are just not as good as the top 3. The skill drop-off is very significant. We have the top 3 teams in pretty much every region, but in China, the skill drop-off is much, much, much bigger. And if it's not Challenge Everything, E-Star Gaming, or Super Perfect Team playing against each other, the series isn't really worth watching. Unless you're just someone who watches every single HGC game the way some of us do. So this week, Challenge Everything, E-Star Gaming, and Super Perfect Team did, or I should say last week, on last Monday and Tuesday, didn't play against each other. Challenge Everything versus Super Perfect Team, I did believe happened last night. Yesterday. It's right there. But I haven't gotten around to watching that yet. Just, that's probably worth watching. I haven't watched the series. I'll have watched it by next week and I'll update you, but the skill drop-off is significant. There could be an upset here and there. It wouldn't actually be surprising to me at all that there is an occasional upset, but the skill drop-off in China is pretty drastic, and outside of the top 3 teams playing directly against each other, the games just aren't that interesting on average, despite the fact that they do have their own meta. So again, if you like China in general, just watch the matches because you like China, but if you just like heroes and you really like high-level competitive play, China's not going to do a lot for you as a region. Moving on to Korea, current standings, we do have MB Black at the top currently, followed by L5 and Miracle. And Tempest struggling a little bit to catch up. Tempest is definitely a team to look out for in terms of the one that can upset the top 3. And I like that we have this storyline in every region except China, essentially, where we have 3 clear top teams. And then we have some 4 or 5 teams that are struggling to break into the top 3, and I feel like they can do it in most cases. So this week, the best series by far was Tempest versus MBB Miracle. MBB Miracle trying to hold on to that top 3, and Tempest actually dethroning them a little bit. Tempest played an exceptional game. They understood their strengths as a team, and you can see in game 5 and 4, they went for Tychus, ETC, Tyrael, Kerosene. And then the Falstad and Ragnaros were flex picks, but that core, those 4 heroes, are extremely comfortable picks for them. And it facilitates something that they really, really like doing, which is team fighting. Tempest is one of the best team fight teams in the entire world, and they were on their comfort picks when it came to team fighting. And they were losing again and again and again to the macro of MVP Miracle, despite the fact that in some cases they were upping kills, they actually lost games. So check that series out. By far the best series played in Korea this weekend. No contest. HGC Europe, we do have Fnatic, Dignitas, and Team Liquid all at the top. And I want to talk about Team Liquid. Team Liquid was undefeated in Phase 1 of HGC. They did lose at the Western Clash, but they ended up having to face both of their top opponents this weekend. They've had to play against both Fnatic and Team Liquid. If you want to watch just one series, it is going to be Team Liquid versus Fnatic. If you want to watch 2 series, it's going to be Team Liquid versus Team Dignitas. They both went 3-2, but even knowing the score, I think those series are worth watching and rewatching. The drafting was really critical, and they both highlight a really important concept that we're going to talk about how important is a best of 5 to a competitive scene like Heroes of the Storm, and it is really, really important. Something we're going to go over. There was a question about it on the Reddit thread, so we're going to go over it, but that is where you want to be for EU. There were some other upsets. B Genius finally took a series 3-1 over Playing Ducks. I think Playing Ducks didn't take that match very seriously. They spent a lot of time preparing for their Tricked Esport match, which they won 3-1, and that's it's unfortunate. Sometimes when you have 2 games in one weekend, you have to focus on which series you think is going to be more important, and you can win one and lose the other one, even if the one you won was against a harder team, because you prepped for the team because you thought you'd have a hard time with them. HGC North America, Tempestorm securing its top spot again. I believe mathematically it is possible for Tempestorm not to have the first seed at this point. They would have to lose to Gale Force Esports and lose one other set, and Gale Force Esports would have to win all of their remaining sets. That's somewhat unlikely, so we can pretty much be assured that Tempo Storm is going to be the number 1 seed for North America. And this week, the match that I want people to watch is Team Niventic versus Tempo Storm. Niventic is a team that is in the bottom, and they've been losing consistently. Niventic has a lot of problems as a team, but their gap is the biggest. The difference between their top performance and their bottom performance is the largest of any team. Tempo Storm is just a consistent team. The difference between Tempo Storm's top performance and Tempo Storm's average performance is not very big. And it's one of the reasons that they are consistently at the top as opposed to occasionally at the top. The Niventic, however, sometimes they just pull off amazing things, and sometimes they're just completely useless all game long, and they just lose horribly. Niventic versus Tempo Storm, I think, shows, at least in a couple of instances, the best of Niventic and the worst, and it shows how stable Tempo Storm is, even when dealing with something that suddenly is much, much, much more difficult to deal with than they expected it to be. So Niventic versus Tempo Storm, by far the most interesting series for North America this week. That is the series recap, and now we will delve into the questions, starting with this incredibly long one in chat. I had a question that I actually meant to ask last week before. Artanis was the hotness for a while in the first split, now we never see him. Dread saw one time in draft last week where we thought Artanis could be an option and started chanting, please no Artanis, please no Artanis. I don't remember him getting nerfed since he was meta. Is Arthas alone enough to make him just never picked, or is there another reason he dropped off? Yeah, the reason Artanis dropped off is because the swap is really predictable. There's really no other way of putting it. We saw in week 1, or week 1, 2, and 3 of HGCNA, people kept getting hit by swap. And then we saw Artanis picked in Korea, and he literally threw out 20, 30, 40 swaps in a game. One of them hit. Exactly one of them hit. And it has to do with how predictable the God swap is. If you Blade Dash as Artanis, you have to start returning before the God swap will work. And if you look at the animation on Artanis' Blade Dash, that gives the enemy team basically a full 3/4 of a second to be like, oh, he's going to throw out the swap. And then just move. So what would happen was, even at the pro level, players in Korea, players in the EU have better positioning in many ways than players in NA do. It's one of the edges they have over us. So in NA, people were consistently getting hit by swaps, and it took them a little while to be like, oh, we can just move, and always be looking for the Q, and then as soon as you see the Artanis Q, just juke, move out of range, whatever, you'll be fine. That was instantly figured out in EU and Korea, like instantly, and that's why he was never popular in those regions. The only time that I think Artanis can be justified is if you desperately need the blind, or if you're on Battlefield of Eternity and you desperately need race. That's it. The swap is really a huge part of his power pie, and at a competitive level, the swap never hits. And if it does hit, then it was not so much you played well, it's that the enemy team made a mistake. And you can't draft around the idea that the enemy team is going to be bad. It just doesn't work. Artanis actually trades well into Arthas, especially with Army of the Dead, because each individual ghoul acts as a target for resetting shields. So that means every single Q, you can get a full shield reset, essentially. Which is pretty good, right? Just not quite good enough in terms of his playmaking potential, and his heroics aren't that good. And heroes that don't have great heroics. He's also not a great solo laner, and a lot of times the bruiser has to be the solo laner. So you have this situation where he's like okay at a lot of things and not stellar at any of them. And you can have heroes that were just as good, but then they're stellar at one thing. Why the low priority of Arthas and Greymane on Dignitas versus TL on Tombs? This is HGC Europe. Team Liquid versus Dignitas. Tomb the Spider Queen. This is the draft. And Arthas and Greymane were not picked at all. So the question is, why the low priority of Arthas and Greymane? Greymane's very meta in the majority of regions right now. A lot of teams have been playing him quite a bit. Arthas as well. But at the competitive level, Arthas is generally not successful as a main tank unless you can force the enemy team to fight over a fixed point. He doesn't really have a strong engage. We've seen time and time again, Arthas tries to initiate with root, someone just dodges it, and then you're like, oh, well, I guess this fight's not happening for a little while. Tomb of the Spider Queen is also a very wave clear centric map. Greymane and Arthas both have reasonable wave clear. But the way the draft went, Team Liquid picked up Ariel first pick. And at that point, you have to pick Gul'dan. Because if you don't pick Gul'dan, then they get Gul'dan, and they have Gul'dan Ariel, which is a combination that is incredibly difficult to deal with. You also want to take Zarya, because if you pick Gul'dan, they're going to take Zarya Vala, and then they have that trifecta of strong shielder, the Ariel with a battery, and the wave clear. Right? So either way, you're in trouble if you don't take Gul'dan Zarya. I would also want to point out, we can start talking about this a little bit. I made a tweet that I thought both of these series were going to go 3-2, and I said whoever wins the first game is going to win the series. And loser's advantage is a big advantage. I don't think people understand, in any given meta, first pick or map pick is going to be stronger. One of those two is going to be stronger. It just depends on how drafting is going, which heroes are stronger. There's some maps where I can make an argument, especially when the solo lane really, really is important on a map like Braxis. You can have a slight advantage going second because you can guarantee that you're winning that solo lane. But then we started to see 3-2 splits, and that's not necessarily true anymore. So whoever wins the first game is in a massive, massive advantage. So teams have been drafting their best comps in game 1. And then if they win that, then they don't focus as hard on game 2 and 4, and they focus really hard on game 3 and 5, where they have the draft advantage. And they know they are going to be able to get the exact comp that they want. So Dignitas did a standard response in many ways. You pick Ariel, we pick Gul'dan Zarya, and then that forces you to go into Vala, because there's limited batteries that are good. You can make an argument for Lunara, always. Lunara's not necessarily great on Tomb of the Spider Queen because she doesn't scale as well. Although I would make an argument that the Wisp is so valuable that I think it might have been better just to go for Vala here. They also go for Lucio because they want double support. Ariel doesn't deal with poke well, and so if you go solo support Ariel, it's just inviting Dignitas to go for something like a Chromie and be like, well, we win now because we're going to be able to poke you and you won't be able to heal it up. And then they pick arguably the strongest solo laner in the game right now on average. Sonya wins most matchups, and she ties the rest of the matchups. It's really hard to actually bully a Sonya completely out of lane. Sonya doesn't just straight up lose most matches, period. And when you're not second pick, you know they can always pick their solo laner last. And then they pick Varian. He's a very strong independent frontliner. He has shield wall. He has all the W talents that increase the number of, well, decrease the cooldown, I should say, not increase the number of charges, but he can use it more frequently. And then Team Dignitas responds with Ragnaros, who, again, is a hero that can defend really well against web weavers, can tie the lane reasonably well. It's not exceptional. It's not like, yay, we got Rag, at least not anymore since his nerfs. But it is, like, Arthas doesn't win the lane versus Sonya, and can't escape. He has no way of getting away from a rotation. He doesn't. Ragnaros at least has Blast Wave and is good defensively because of Molten Core. He has Smash, which is a good follow-up to Blessed Shield. There's really no point in either of these drafts where you can be like, I could pick up Arthas or Greymane here and it would be okay. Because Greymane, would have to fit into the 4-man. The 4-man already has its damage dealer. And Arthas is really just not considered a competitive tank in the pro scene. I would actually argue that he's not a tank. He's just sometimes double bruiser works in Hero League. We had a Butcher against Sonya twice, once against Winwith, when Butcher did well each time. How does this matchup work, and should Sonya have done better? I have been told by multiple people that Butcher wins the solo lane versus Sonya. I started testing it. I think I might agree. I think Sonya is supposed to lose that lane. The fact that Butcher has a stun and can talent into reducing the cooldown to deny whirlwind value, the fact that he wins the 1v1 trade if you just stand there and auto each other, is pretty disgusting. I think Butcher actually does win that lane. I'm trying to get some pro players to do the matchup for me in like a scrim or something so that I can use that as a replay for going alone. That hasn't happened yet, but when it does, I'll let you guys know. Unfortunately, there's not that many people who play a lot of Butcher and are pro players. So I'm working on it. I'm working on it. That will be an episode of Butcher's Soul Lanes will be an episode of Going Alone though in the reasonably near future. Give me like at least a couple weeks. Would this mean Butcher is legit on Brexit? Yeah, possibly. I mean, that's the thing. Sonya wins a lot of lanes, and having a hero you can pick and be like, we know we beat Sonya in lane, is kind of a big deal. And it just depends on what other lanes he wins. Right? So if he wins more than just the Sonya lane, if he wins like 2 or 3 of the common solo lanes that you see on Braxis, then he's going to end up being quite exceptional as a solo laner. Especially on maps where the rotation to him is really difficult. Also, dueling is a big emphasis on some maps, some of the bigger maps anyway. So if he's a reasonable solo laner in the 1v1, and then is also just straight up a good duelist in general, there's some other maps where he could potentially be viable. So that is going to be an episode of Going Alone. I'm not comfortable saying he definitely beats Sonya. So far, in all my testing, he's beaten Sonya like 100% of the time. Abathur has seemed to gain a lot of popularity lately in EU, even fairly early in the draft, despite being traditionally considered a fairly countable hero. Do you have any insight into why this is, and when do you draft Abathur? Draft him early. Follow-up question. When you draft D-Shire Abathur, what are the conditions to make him work? Given the objective doesn't draw people out of lane, his value in the early game has to come from something other than Split Soak. Abathur has global presence. It's not so much that he is a global hero, it's that he has global presence. The hat is pretty underestimated. The hat was recently buffed. Right? So we're going to go heroes, Abathur. We'll focus just on HGC here. And we'll look at the matches. He was drafted relatively early in the matches he was drafted. There was one in particular. Here it is. This is the Towers of Doom is become his big map, as well as occasionally on Dragonshire. So, here he was literally first picked by Dignitas. And the value of Abathur is he can always be doing something useful on the map. He's always really good at facilitating 1v1s. So anytime there's a split objective, Dragonshire, Towers of Doom, Warhead Junction, he can be there, right? As long as he's looking at the minimap, he can be like, oh, that's a 1v1, now it's a 1v1 plus a hat, which is something you win a good bit of the time. He doesn't necessarily need to be enabling a auto attack hero, which is the way we've commonly seen him in pro play, because Adrenal Overload is obviously such a good talent at level 4. He doesn't need to be doing that. He can, he can be a double gray main. He can be enabling the gray main. That's fine. But he can also do a lot of other things. And the hat has a 4-second cooldown, whereas something like Falstad's Fly has, a 50-second cooldown, 55-second cooldown. That's considerably longer. So having global presence on a 4-second cooldown is really good, particularly if you have comms. Also, vision is the #1 thing in professional play. The reason that Muradin is considered the top tank in Korea is because Koreans always want to know what's going on. And Muradin can overextend really, really far and always get away because of jump. And so controlling vision is really important, and Abathur just automatically gives you vision of everything. He gives you vision of every rotational path. He gives you, vision of what the enemy team is planning to do based on the way they're moving on the map. Sometimes people will feign a rotation. They'll be like, "Oh, they go down and then they go back and then they go up," right? That doesn't work against Abathur because there's a mine there anyway. You're gonna get dismounted. He's gonna see it. It slows down rotations. It means that your team can always be in position first and set up, and if you're attacking into an arc, that's not as beneficial as being there already with the arc. So on the maps where Abathur is really strong because of these split objectives, Abathur is really strong, and he greatly facilitates the 1v1s. So that's in addition to the fact that, anytime there is some downtime, he can get that split soak. Just by grabbing the hat or putting his body in danger if it's safe to do so. It's really dangerous to leave an Abathur unattended, and as teams get better at team fighting, which is something that we've seen a lot of, teams have gotten progressively better at team fighting, where the point where no one dies in some cases the first 8, 9, 10, 12 minutes of a game because people know they're going to die and they get out. But that means team fights last for longer. They'll last for upwards of 40 seconds pretty consistently. That means that Abathur just got an entire wave and denied an entire wave, at least, during that team fight. And those incremental advantages add up a lot over time. Abathur's a hero that's all about very, very small advantages. And here we see a game. It's actually still another. There was a question about... there's a question about him not enabling, but so far, like, we're looking at these drafts, and he's always drafted with Greymane. Greymane. Here we go. Here's one where he's just drafted with Haka on Cursed Hollow. Cursed Hollow is his best map, though, far and away. The reason Abathur's so good on Cursed Hollow is, generally speaking, you want to get as much value out of a curse as you can in terms of getting as much experience as possible. Abathur does that automatically if he's good. He can mine the minion rotation behind the forts, so you're guaranteed to get every single possible wave. And he can hat each individual lane one at a time and pick up all this experience. In many cases, you can go straight to boss once you get curse if you have an Abathur, and Abathur will actually grab all of the experience from most of the experience from all three lanes. Meaning that if you have an Abathur, you can always double boss after curse. And then the bosses are on cooldown, and they'll come up right as the third or fourth tribute comes around in the next cycle, which means you can afford, if you get the next one tribute, you can afford to give up the next two tributes and double boss again, as long as the tribute spawning is favorable for you to do that. And you'll know if it's favorable for you to do that because you have Mines for Vision, right? You never really need a justification for drafting Abathur on Cursed Hollow. But yeah, drafting him with Greymane in general is really good. And the fact that he helps your solo win the lane, if it's a close matchup, or dominate the lane if it's an unfavored matchup on D-Shire, is just incredibly beneficial. So yeah, Abathur is just a really underestimated hero by a lot of people, and he's just extremely difficult to deal with. A lot of people think that stealth counters Abathur. Abathur counters stealth heroes because stealth hero needs to not get revealed on their rotations for them to be really effective, and mines just reveal you constantly. It's like, what do you do? So all you really need for Abathur is like a reasonable clone target in fights. There's a GM one trick Abathur right now who got to GM playing support Abathur with the full Carapace build, Soma Transference at 13, and sometimes Monstrosity, sometimes not. It's the global presence. If you're constantly looking at the map and being like, my team needs me here, my team needs me here, my team needs me here, it can be really good. It's hard to find the windows where you can soak and still be 100% effective on the team, but with comms, it's not as difficult. So, explain Chinese stitches. China has always played stitches. I don't know how familiar people are with the Chinese scene, but China has always played stitches. Six, who was the tank for Zero Panda before it disbanded, was largely considered to be one of the best stitches players in the world, easily the top three, with along with JPL and Sign. Right? So Stitches has always sort of existed in the Chinese meta because when the top tank on your top team has him as a niche pick that you always have to be drafting around, people are like, well, And as a result of that, a lot of people learned Stitches just to learn how to play against Stitches, right? Because you can't practice, knowing you're going to go up against Zero Panda, you can't practice adequately if you're not practicing against someone who plays Stitches. So they started drafting him just to, in scrims, and learning him just to play against him. I once watched Noblesse land every single hook for 10 minutes straight. Yeah, Noblesse's Stitches is also really insane. Honestly, Noblesse is not like bad at any hero he plays, so it's hard to say. But Noblesse already has title of best Murden world, so we're not gonna give him too many accolades. So yeah, Stitches has always been in the metas. They will have a little bit of different builds. I think the Chinese were the first to discover that Savor the Flavor was bugged to apply to any bite and not just bites on heroes. And so they would take it, and the rest of the world was looking at that and being like, that's a terrible talent. Turns out that they found out it was bugged, and it got the regeneration regardless. They do a lot of them do prefer slam build stitches. They'll just go full W build 100% of the time, as opposed to the hybrid builds that we see that are more tank oriented with Dampened Magic, Amplified Healing, Tenderizer, or Last Bite, or Savor at 7, depending. I still don't think Savor the Flavor is a very good talent. But yeah, Stitches gets played because there was a really good Stitches player in China. It's the same reason that Illidan gets played a lot in Korea. There was a really good Illidan player, and everyone else was started playing Illidan because they saw the potential, right? And Illidan still occasionally gets played in Korea. Less so now. We're not in a very good Illidan meta. MVP Miracle versus GG Game 1 Tomb Diablo pick. So that is Korea. MVP Miracle versus GG Game 1. The Diablo pickup. So the way this draft went, the two really good ways of dealing with Diablo are Tychus and Leoric. GG has Tychus, which is a meta pickup on average, and they also pick Leoric in their last pick slot. So, and Tomb of the Spider Queen has always been Diablo's second best map after Shrines. For a while, actually, Diablo was one of the meta picks on Tomb of the Spider Queen, particularly in the Tyrande meta. You would go Diablo Tyrande on Tomb basically 100% of the time, if you could actually get it. The number of walls around the turn-in point give him really, really good stun options. The number of chokes makes APOC really strong as an option. And the fact that you're constantly rotating in groups of 4 means that his support is always with him. And Devil's Due just gives him a ton of pre-healing. If Diablo picks up a globe, he's basically unkillable until that globe expires. And there's situations in the 4-man rotation, if your wave clear is good enough, where you can actually have 2 globes and a Malphite ticking away on you, and you can go absolutely ham and just pick people up and slam them against walls, and they'll die. It's also a really good solution to Nazeebo. The way to beat Nazeebo comps isn't to beat them at 20, it's to beat them before 20, and just dominate the early game so hard that they never get to 20 and you close out the game easy. So the Diablo pickup makes a lot of sense in that context. It was a little bit of a risk that they would pick Leoric to counter, but they did the classic mistake of saving their support for last pick. Whenever you save your support for last pick, you put yourself in a position where you cannot respond to the enemy team's comp, period. So even though Leoric was available as a counter to be picked, they couldn't pick it. MVP Miracle had to pick a support. So GG was like, thanks, we'll take Diablo, you pick a support, we take Leoric. We're going to be in shape. Diablo's just always been really, really good on Tomb. Explain Alarak build on BOE with full push build, mainly the push at 13 and range at 16. Forgot who played that, EU. I think you're right. I think it was EU. You guys are just asking questions all over the place. I have to go from game to game to game. Was it Tempo Storm? I think it was actually Tempo Storm versus... It's right. It's here, right? Tempo Storm versus Team Freedom. We can actually watch. We'll just bring it up real quick so we can see the talent build. I think it was full push. I think it was every sadism. Change the quality there.
To try and bait a fight.
I'll poke here and there.
Yeah.
Ancestral healing.
Pulling.
So
deep.
It was the reduced cooldown at 16, Psychokinesis, right? And then we had the unusual pick here is really the 13 talent that adds I believe it's a slow, right? Hindered motion. Yeah, it's a slow. Reduces your sadism by 10%, but causes telekinesis to slow enemies by 40% for 2 seconds. 40% is a massive, massive slow. It's actually quite large. And basically the way... Ooh. That's not right. There we go. The way Alarak's being played in this composition is he's being played as a pick artist. He really just wants to be the setup for his team. Greymane has all the damage that they need. Alarak doesn't need to do additional damage. So he has the level 1 talent for the increased range. He has double cross because honestly you should never do anything else at 4. He has the cooldown, which gives him poke. Poke really matters on Battlefield of Eternity because it gets you in a situation where you're going to be, doing relatively well in terms of wearing people down on the defense. And whenever you have an Alarak, you're automatically on the defensive because Alarak's drafted for defense. The slow makes it more likely that when you telekinesis someone into an immortal stun, that immortal stun is going to hit them, which matters quite a bit. And then the reduced cooldown makes it so you can do it more often. I don't like this build as the soul winner. In general, I think that if you're going to reduce your sadism, then you shouldn't be solo laning. You should be in the 4-man. We've seen builds like this, for instance, on Dragonshire from Korean teams with Alarak in the 4-man. And he was just constantly setting up picks for his team. Totally reasonable to do that. But that's sort of the niche of the build. You have to trust the rest of your team to do damage, which is one of the reasons that this build does not have a very high win rate, for instance, in solo queue Hero League. Because you can't communicate with your team. You can't be like, I'm going to set them up here for you right now. And you're there, right? It just doesn't work that way. But in a coordinated environment, I think Alarak's actually underrated as a pick enabler in a coordinated environment, and builds that increases distance and add status effects are, I think, a little underestimated in competitive play. So Tempo Storm is exactly the sort of team. They're a team that really thinks about the game a lot. They're exactly the sort of team that I would expect to pull out builds like this consistently. Oh, here's the Abathur question. Why did the draft of TL and Big, TL versus Dig on Curse Hollow work that well with an Abba, but no Mura, Illy, Grey to assist? So this was Team Liquid versus Dignitas on Cursed. So here's a funny fact. Lucio with a hat is really scary. We've actually seen in competitive play a Lucio with a hat kill a Falstad. It's pretty funny because just of the sheer mobility. But Tyrael, Abathur does two things. One, he makes any melee hero a ranged hero, because stab gives you range, which allows you to chase people down and finish them off. Which means anytime you have a highly mobile frontline, your mobile frontline can never be gotten away from and can always put additional damage. Tyrael has a lot of surprising 1v1 potential with Herodic Reforging, with Smite, with Reciprocate, with all of these tools he has to be extremely mobile and always stay on top of a fragile target. So if you put a hat on Tyrael, he can kill any backliner that's not babysitted by his team, including Sylvanas. Although Sylvanas wasn't picked up yet when the Tyrael pick was made. Actually, no, she was, because, yeah, so Sylvanas was picked up, they had Tyrael. They had some other things, options they could have gone into, but realistically, Abathur is so good on Cursed Hollow that he doesn't necessarily need someone to enable. We talked about that a little bit already, but you really just need a tank. Like, a hat on a tank, good enough, as long as that tank's going to be up in people's faces. The reason it works really well with Muradin, for instance, is because Muradin can always get on top of a squishy backliner as well. He has the mobility. He can keep them next to him with all his CC. Tyrael doesn't really have CC outside of slows, but he has so much mobility that it doesn't matter. I'll be there. Yay! This is the big question. Is the loser's advantage too strong in series where the teams are very high level and evenly matched? In both the Dignitas versus Liquid series and the Fnatic versus Liquid series, the team with loser's advantage won every game. And then they link my tweet, which made me look at other series and not think it's a series, and I think it's a serious trend. I don't know if there is something you could do outside of the current advantage. I think the current advantage is very reasonable. It gives teams the option of picking if they believe that first pick or map pick is stronger. I think teams have gone for first pick 100% of the time, by the way, so currently in the meta, first pick is definitely stronger overall. So that means that winning the first game is the most important. We talked about that a little bit, and it's true. There's just no other. It's true. The advantage currently is really strong. It means winning the first game is really important. But the thing about best of 5 series is that you have to go in with really clear strategies that you know are going to win for this to matter. Which means you have to go in with a clear idea of how you're going to win the first map. You have to go in with a clear idea of how you're going to win map 3 and 5. You don't care about map 2 and 4 as much. Like, you'd like to win them, because certainly 3-0 is easier than 3-2. It's less games. But when you have two relatively even teams who are familiar with each other's hero pools, if your options are go in with a really clear strategy for the maps where you know you have an advantage and win those, or cheese. Like, those are your options. And I'm actually a little bit surprised that we haven't seen more unusual / cheesy strategies coming out from some of the top teams to sort of upset the balance, particularly in games 2 and 4. Because when you're second pick, that's when you cheese, right? You have last pick. You have an uncontestable pick. Something's going to happen with that last pick, and the enemy team can't respond to it in the draft anymore. They have to respond to it in game. So I think this is okay, but I would like to see teams, if they're going to essentially concede games 2 and 4 anyway, and focus all their efforts on games 1, 3, and 5, to do a little more cheesing in games 2 and 4 and maybe upset it so they only have to win, one less game. They only have to play one less game. But it is a definite trend, and teams are doing it on purpose. They are planning to win game 1. They are planning to win game 3. They are planning to win game 5, and they're playing standard and safe with really predictable drafts in games 2 and 4. At least Fnatic and Dignitas are. There's some other examples as well. We've seen a number of plays this weekend where a player, often on Muradin or other tanks, but that is exclusive to them, would run the enemy team around when they knew they were going to die to buy time. In what cases do you think this was the correct tactic and benefited the team? In which cases do you think it just ended up staggering death timers and the player was better off just trying to get damage on the enemy team and dying sooner? That's a really hard question. So I think the best example of this, Muradin's Great Escape. What game was that? It was on Infernal Shrines. If anyone remembers, who was playing Muradin? I know it was EU, right? So it was Infernal Shrines, and it was this weekend. Was it Fnatic versus playing Ducks? I think it was Fnatic versus playing Ducks. And it was bottom. The fort was already dead. Yeah, it was totally Chris. I wish I had a timestamp of this so I could just find it. Yeah, here it is, the Great Escape. Alright, so the things that go into this question are pretty complicated. You can see Chris is just creating so much space. He gets rooted. He jumps away. He's just creating space. Avatar is down. He's actually going to jump into the base here. He activates Stone Form. All of these cooldowns will be available when he reses. Basically, we're at that point in the game where the next time there's a fight, all the cooldowns will essentially be available. He does start to Hearth here, a little bit cheeky. Don't think that's going to work out for you, Chris. Sorry. And the answer to this question is really, when is the objective coming up? If you're dead at the start of the objective, that's really bad. Like, really bad. So the situations where it makes sense to create space for your team are, you'll die, but you'll still be alive in time for the objective, and your team is doing something useful on the map. So you can see during this event, both bruiser camps were capped top, and they're doing a lot to get the objective. If the call had been made to give up the objective, then you create as much time as you can, right? As long as your team is doing something useful on the map. If your team's not doing anything useful on the map at this point, then you just give up. You just die and let it go. But if your team is doing something useful on the map, and the 2, 3, 4 the enemy team are chasing you, you're gonna die no matter what. So it makes sense to give your time as much possible to get that. Your team as much time as possible to get that activity. They only end up getting the camp. It does get them the keep wall. That's an additional 1,300 experience that they pick up. That is not an insignificant amount. I think that it would have been better to die right away and contest the objective, because they would have gotten at least one of the bruiser camps regardless. They didn't need to get 2. So I think in this situation, as hilarious as it wasn't actually the right decision. But on average, it's usually a good idea, especially if your team is actually doing something. In Hero League, people will stop and type and be like, what the hell are you doing? In competitive, there's calms. That doesn't happen. But in this case, it worked out pretty well for them. I do think that it would have been better for him to die, get the bruiser camp, and then they contest. But not all teams have a running counter of when the objective is coming up. Good teams do. Good teams will type in chat when the Punisher died, so they'll know when the window is for it to come back up, and you get kind of a feel for it over time as well. We've seen a ton of upsets and near upsets in NA and significantly fewer in EU and possibly other regions. There haven't been very many upsets in other regions. Do you think that now that we're a few weeks into Phase 1 Part 2, that this is because the lower NA teams are leveling up? Is it because the top teams are slipping? Or do you think that's a clear linear power curve in other regions where since NA teams are maybe less well-rounded than other regions, in that region the teams are more of a rock, paper, scissors conflict? I think that most of the upsets we've seen have been a result of having to play 2 games in one weekend. If you look at it, you can see, like, Team Liquid, arguably this isn't an upset because Team Liquid had lost the Western Clash, so we knew that when there was a rematch, the games were going to be very close. But Team Liquid having to go up against both Fnatic and Dignitas, that's pretty upsetting. That's pretty upsetting. I also think there's a psychological aspect to it. Some teams are just in a position where however much they say they're preparing, they think they're better than the other team. And so they go into that first game and they might lose because they've been prepped for it. But the other team knows they don't have a great chance. They put everything on the line to try and really go in. And losing a first game in a set when you're not necessarily able to reset and be like, okay, we lost that game because obviously we made a bunch of mistakes. Let's move on to the next game. Sometimes it's, oh my God, we lost to those guys? And then that attitude comes into the second game. Sometimes you forget to play your own game. You play really aggressively instead, and you end up losing because you're not playing your standard style. And I think that's mostly what it comes down to. I think most of the upsets have been a result of really good prep by the team, the underdog, quote unquote, coming in and being like, we're prepping for you, we know what you do, you talk about your strategies, you know, we've watched all your interviews, we've looked at your stats, we're going to do this, 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 and this. We know that these things work against these things. This is what you do, so this is what we're going to do. Good. And the team that lost often had 2 matches that weekend, so they prepped for one, not the other one. And they didn't have that competitive mindset of we're going to put everything into this game no matter what. They were like, we can take it easy. This is going to be an easy set of games. Turns out it wasn't. I think the biggest example of that is Gale Force versus No Tomorrow. The upset of the century. We talked about that last time, but it just happens. Sometimes you think you go into a game with a certain idea of how things are going to work. It doesn't work that way, and some people just can't reset. They can't reset in the moment. Game 5, Niventic chose to take Tempo Storm for Dragonshire. Do you think this was the correct decision, or do you think Niventic would have had a better time on Braxis with Kenma and Medic? It's a really good question. Kenma's overextending is the number one reason that Niventic loses games. Like, literally the number one reason. It's very unusual that you can have a pro team and point to one player and be like, this is the reason the team loses games. And it's not just Kenma, it's Kenma overextending. Kenma doesn't always overextend. When Kenma doesn't overextend, Niventic wins games. But when Kenma does overextend, it's literally just everyone targets him and he dies. And he doesn't overextend on Medic. But because he doesn't overextend on Medic, teams would ban it. Teams would be like, we're not letting Kenma have Medic because then he won't overextend and we can't kill him. So I think Dragonshire was a reasonable pick because it is a skirmish-oriented map, and skirmishes are certainly something where Zuna starts to excel. I mean, he basically saved the game with the 1v5 Zeratul kill in Game 5. Didn't end up winning the game, but it did prevent the end of happening right there. Braxis may have been a better pickup, especially if Medic was let through. Maybe they weren't thinking about the fact that Kenma on Medic is something that is harder to deal with because he does, become slightly reluctant to move too far forward. I know that you watch a lot of games on VOD or via replay instead of live because of time constraints. Have you considered streaming yourself watching the Korean and maybe Chinese games so we can get your commentary on it? Is that something people would want? I could ask. I don't have replays for the Chinese games. I've thought about contacting NetEase to see if I can get replays because there are some Chinese games that I would like to go over in more detail for various videos for the stream, including going alone. Do people really want to just watch me watch the Korean games and comment on them? Because I feel like doing that live would not be a good idea. But if... Okay. Alright. Yeah, I do that, for the record. I already watch them every week. Maybe on Mondays. Maybe what I'll do is I'll start watching the best Korean series live on Mondays on stream and just talking about the games and the drafts. Could certainly do that. It seems to be Korea the region where people most want that experience. All right, so next Monday I will watch some of the Korean games live on stream. We won't be able to have sound because I have to mute the VOD, but why is there a difference between map preferences between regions? What causes this? It really comes down to the fact that maps are hard to play on. There's a lot of strategies for each individual map that take a while to figure out. Stitches Drawn on Tomb was a go-to strategy for a long time. It took us a long time to figure that out, and then it sort of faded away. It comes back occasionally. We saw it at Western Clash, but regions develop specialty maps because there will be usually one or two teams that are like, I'm really good at this map. We have a really cool strategy for this map. We're going to win on this map, and that forces the ban from the other teams. But most teams are like, well, we don't want to ban this map, right? Because we kind of know how to play it, and then they just lose. But then most teams that get really good at one map start branching out. They're like, okay, well, we have to get good at that map because we know someone's going to ban this map. Tomb has always been a EU specialty because they were the first region that got really good at drafting to guard the turn-ins. They were the first region that was like down on that. Infernal Shrines was always a little bit of a Korean specialty because of how far ahead you could get just by winning team fights, and Koreans love brawling. Dragonshire has always been really popular in NA because it gives individuals chances to sign. You're winning the 1v1s, you're winning the 2v2s. You don't necessarily have to win full 5v5 brawls and depend on your team, and a lot of NA teams are like, I'm the best player on the team, I don't want to depend on my team. I don't like saying that. I'm from MA. I'm a big fan of a lot of NA players, but sometimes the teams are just... So, yeah, it really comes down to the fact that certain teams, in certain top teams in each region, decided they liked certain maps, and they started playing those maps a lot. And if you wanted to beat those teams, you had to get good at that map as well. So, all the way up. I really liked Fan's interview after the event when he was addressing the fact that he swears by win rates rather than meta picks and would even give it to Dread's Asmonuk a try. Yeah, so the context of that interview, Fan said he was like, if you have a high win rate on a hero, we're going to draft that hero. And Dread's question was basically, why does Zagara keep working for you? And his answer was, Crone has a really high win rate on Zagara. Crone's really good at Zagara. So we keep winning with Zagara. Pretty straightforward. In 2015, he had a really high win rate with Illidan, so he picked Illidan any chance he got and won a lot of games with it. And Dre's question was, if you had a sub, and he said he had 100% win rate with Asmo, would you play Asmo? And Fan was like, yeah, sure, I'd play Asmo. We'd draft 4 people to set up the comp around it and play Asmo. And I think that's a really good attitude. Gale Force is a really flexible team in their thought process about drafting. They'll play anything if they think it'll work. And there's actually an interview with ADRD today posted on Reddit where he basically said the same thing. And he said, we have unusual picks because most people don't want to put in the time to learn these heroes and know if they're good or not. So we put in the time to learn these heroes and know if they're good or not, and then we pick them and we win with them. And it is a lot of work to play every single hero, to understand where heroes could theoretically fit in draft, and then just to get one of your players up to a level of mechanical execution where they can deal with the hero. Because there's a big difference between someone who's played a hero for 10 games and someone who's played a game for 150 games. It matters a lot. So I expect GFE in the future to be one of the strongest drafting teams in North America, just because they are willing to play multiple things. And they are all working on building their hero pools. Where did all that Q-Build Arthas come from this weekend? It wasn't just this weekend. Q-Build Arthas has been coming around. And the baseline buffs to his Q mattered quite a bit. We can see if we can The replays aren't all uploaded yet, but you can see... I don't know, the replays... Why is it not there? There should be a Q build here. At least one. I know at least one of the replays is available. Master League is letting me down. But Q build Arthas is really centered around winning the solo lane. We've actually talked about it last week. But if you're trying to win the lane, particularly against a ranged hero or a hero that has poke against you, you can't actually damage them because they just back up. Right? You can't get... Unless they make a mistake, you can't like root them, get them into your aura, and start doing damage to them. So the best thing you can do is freeze the lane on your side of the map, force them to come into you, and then just poke them with Q. Just poke, 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 poke. And the reduced cooldown and the increased range on 4 makes that really easy to do, and then the fact that you get healing out of it at 7. So the Q build's all about winning, or at least tying your solo lane and not getting bullied out of the lane. It's also very mana efficient because you don't, if you're just poking, you don't ever turn your E on because you're standing at range and you're waiting to be engaged onto and then peeling for your team. So you don't have to activate Reverse Tempest, which does matter on Battlefield of Eternity, which is another map where we saw it. That's really what it comes down to. Most players in Hero League aren't that patient, so it doesn't really apply to Battlefield of Eternity in my mind. People will just come on you anyway. You don't have to stand there and poke them and wait. I remember you talked about it last week. Actually, Q talent at 16 has been taken by Alex the Progi, just the Q talent at 16. And the way the Q talent at 16, the way he's been using it, if you go watch the replays, is he's been letting himself get low on purpose with army already popped. And then he'll walk up to a target, do the full combo of root into auto attack, into trait, into Q. And then he'll start healing himself with army because it gives you that enormous amount of burst. So, especially with Shattered Armor at 13, that extra damage gets increased by the vulnerable from Shattered Armor. Good times. So the Q talent at 16, all by itself, is good enough just for a burst combo if you are having short fights, if you have a burst comp. And Arthas can contribute to that a little bit with both Shattered Armor and Embrace Death. And then, yeah, if you go full Q build, there's an argument for going Embrace Death at 16 as well. It just depends on whether or not you really need Remorseless Winter. Generally speaking, if you're going for Q build, you're getting poked by ranged heroes, so you shouldn't need Remorseless Winter, because if you're on top of someone already, then you already, have closed the gap, and you should be able to get the kill, because one of the dynamics is that if a hero has poke, they tend to be more fragile. So if you're already on top of them, you should just be able to kill them without the uptime necessary on the route from Remorseless Winter. So I wouldn't say the Q build Arthas came from anywhere. It's just that people are starting to understand his rework a little better and starting to understand his matchups. I still would like to see Alex go Q build against Rexxar in the solo lane and see if that makes a difference in who wins the lane, because I think it would. I think that Arthas could tie the Rexxar lane if he went full Q build. I actually might have to ask Kappa